If you've ever been treated like a stranger by the people who are supposed to love you most, this story is for you. My name is Rebecca Carter. I'm 52 years old. For 28 years, I wore the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, places most Americans only hear about on the evening news. I've lost brothers. I've buried sisters in arms. I've stood at attention while folded flags were handed to grieving families. But nothing ever hurt as much as hearing my own father introduce me as, "Oh, don't mind her. She's just a guest." He wasn't joking. He wasn't being sarcastic. He meant every single word. And the worst part, he said it while standing next to my little sister on the happiest day of her life. A day I almost didn't attend. A day that ended with a Marine general saluting me in front of over 300 wedding guests, while my father couldn't even look me in the eye. But to understand why, we've got to go back. I grew up outside Raleigh, North Carolina. My father, Richard Carter, believed sons carried the family name. Daughters? Well, daughters were supposed to marry well. My problem? I never wanted that life. When I was 17, I walked into a Marine recruiting office. Dad nearly exploded. The Marines? That's for men. Mom tried to calm him down. Rebecca's just going through a phase. I wasn't. 3 months later, I shipped to boot camp. Dad didn't come. Mom cried. My little sister Emily waved goodbye from the car. That was the last time anyone in my family acted proud of me. Over the years, I missed birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, family vacations. Not because I wanted to, because America needed Marines overseas. Every deployment meant another empty chair at the dinner table, another family photo without me, another excuse for Dad to tell neighbors, "Rebecca's too busy playing soldier." Funny thing is, while I was dodging rockets halfway around the world, Emily stayed home. She married young, got divorced, started over, changed careers 3 different times. Every mistake she made, Dad paid for. Every dream she chased, Dad financed. Meanwhile, I paid my own way, bought my own home, built my own retirement, never asked for a dime. Still, I was somehow the disappointment. Go figure. 2 years before my retirement, Emily got engaged. Her fiancé's name was Daniel Brooks. Successful, polite, former Navy officer turned defense contractor. Good man. The first thing Daniel ever said to me was, "I've heard a lot about you." I smiled. "Hopefully something good." He hesitated, then laughed awkwardly. Honestly, not really. That hit harder than I had expected. Apparently, Dad had spent years telling people I was stubborn, selfish, always choosing work over family. I didn't argue. I just changed the subject, because Marines learn something civilians rarely understand. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could. Fast forward, retirement finally arrived. 28 years, 1 Bronze Star, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, 3 combat deployments, countless names engraved in my memory forever. The Corps planned a retirement ceremony. Nothing fancy, just fellow Marines, command staff, friends I'd earned over decades. I mailed invitations to everyone. Dad, Mom, Emily, Daniel, even my cousins. I reserved an entire front row. No one came. Not one. You know where they were? At Emily's bridal shower. Apparently, the family decided, Rebecca retires every day. Emily only gets married once. That sentence followed me for weeks. I never forgot it. 3 months later, Emily called. "You are coming to the wedding, right?" I hesitated. Would it matter? Silence. Then she sighed. "Come on, Becky, don't make this about you." That made me laugh, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. I had spent 28 years making everything about everyone else, yet somehow I was still the selfish one. I finally agreed. I'll be there. Wedding day arrived. Charleston, South Carolina. Historic waterfront venue. Beautiful weather. American flags lining the harbor. Ironically, the venue overlooked a Marine memorial. Life has a strange sense of humor. I wore a navy blue formal dress. No medals, no ribbons, no Marine pins, just a simple silver eagle necklace. Most guests had no idea I'd served. I preferred it that way. Walking toward the entrance, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe today would be different. Maybe, just maybe, families could start over. I should have known better. As I stepped inside, Dad spotted me immediately. His smile disappeared. Not because he hated me, but because he looked embarrassed, like I wasn't supposed to be there. He walked over before I could reach Emily. "Rebecca." "Dad." Awkward silence. Then he glanced toward a group of guests. "Listen, we've got important people here." "Okay. Just don't make today about your military stories." I blinked. I wasn't planning to. "Good." Then came the sentence. The one I'll hear for the rest of my life. A businessman walked over. "Richard, who's the lady?" Dad smiled, politely. Without even looking at me, he answered, "Oh, she's just a guest." Just a guest. 28 years wearing the national uniform, reduced to 2 words. Not daughter, not Marine, not Rebecca, just a guest. For a second, everything around me went silent. The music faded, people laughed somewhere behind me, champagne glasses clinked, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Daniel looked confused. Emily looked away. Mom stared at the floor. Nobody corrected him. Nobody said, "Actually, that's his oldest daughter." Nobody. I smiled anyway, because Marines don't fall apart in public. We endure. I simply nodded. "Nice meeting you," I told the businessman, then walked toward the back of the reception hall. Alone. Exactly where my father believed I belonged. About 20 minutes later, guests were settling into their seats. The ceremony was about to begin. Then I noticed something strange. Outside the ballroom windows, black government SUVs rolled into the driveway. 1, 2, 3. Men in dress blue uniforms stepped out. Not junior officers, senior officers. Very senior. Then one tall figure exited the last vehicle. 4 stars gleamed under the afternoon sun. Conversations inside the ballroom began to slow. A wedding coordinator rushed toward the entrance. Security straightened their jackets. Someone whispered, "Is that a Marine general?" I looked through the glass and immediately recognized him. General Michael Harrison, my former commanding officer, the man who had led one of the most dangerous operations of my career. The man I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. I hadn't invited him, so why was he walking into my sister's wedding? And why was he looking directly at me? The ballroom had gone strangely quiet. Guests near the windows stopped talking. Servers carrying champagne trays froze mid-step. Even the wedding band lowered their instruments. Outside, 4 black SUVs sat in a perfect line. The lead vehicle's door opened. Out stepped General Michael Harrison. 4 stars on each shoulder. Dress blue uniform pressed so sharply it looked carved from steel. Every Marine in the room, active duty or retired, instinctively straightened their posture. The general didn't pause to admire the decorations. He didn't greet the bride. He didn't shake my father's hand. He walked directly toward me. I stayed seated in the back corner. Old habit. Never assume you're the reason someone important is walking your way. But as he got closer, I realized there wasn't anyone behind me. His eyes locked on mine. Then he smiled. the same calm smile he'd worn years ago before missions that changed lives. When he reached me, he came to attention. The entire room watched. Then, General Harrison raised his right hand and saluted. Perfectly, crisply, silently. Every conversation died. I stood immediately and returned the salute. For several seconds, the ballroom was completely silent. Not one fork moved, not one glass clinked. Then the general lowered his hand. His voice carried across the room. "Colonel Rebecca Carter, it's an honor to see you again, ma'am." 300 people gasped at once. I noticed my father's face immediately. He looked confused, then shocked, then pale, because he'd never once bothered to learn what rank I'd retired at. To him, I'd always just been playing soldier. The general reached out and shook my hand firmly. "I owe you an apology." I frowned. "Sir?" "I couldn't attend your retirement ceremony." He sighed. "Washington pulled me into emergency meetings that morning, but I promised myself I'd congratulate you in person." I smiled. "You didn't have to come all this way." He looked around the ballroom. "Actually, yes, I did." Guests began whispering. "Colonel? Did he say colonel? Wait, she's the bride's sister? I thought her father said she was just a guest." The whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Dad stood frozen near the head table. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear. Emily kept staring at me, then at the general, trying to process everything. Daniel finally walked over. "Sir?" The general shook his hand politely. "Congratulations on your wedding." Then he smiled. "You've married into quite a remarkable family." Daniel laughed awkwardly. "Honestly, I don't think I know half the story." The general turned toward him. "No, most people don't." One of the younger Marines standing behind the general stepped forward carrying a polished wood case. The general accepted it carefully. He looked back at me. "Rebecca, this belongs with you." He opened the case. Inside rested a beautifully framed flag. Beneath it, a bronze plaque. The room leaned forward. The general read aloud. "Presented to Colonel Rebecca Carter in recognition of 28 years of extraordinary service to the United States Marine Corps, whose courage under fire saved American and Allied lives beyond measure." The ballroom became so quiet, you could hear someone crying. Then came the part I never expected. The general looked directly at the guests. "Most of you know Rebecca as today's bride's sister." He smiled gently. "Allow me to tell you who she really is." I instantly felt uncomfortable. He noticed. "Relax, Colonel. You've hidden in the background long enough." The room chuckled softly. Then his expression turned serious. 15 years ago, our convoy was ambushed. Explosives disabled 2 vehicles. Enemy fire trapped Marines on both sides of the road. Nobody in the ballroom moved. Rebecca ignored direct orders to stay behind cover. I sighed quietly. He was really going to tell the story. Instead, she crossed open ground under machine gun fire. Twice. She carried wounded Marines to safety, organized defensive positions, then volunteered to stay behind until every last service member had been evacuated. He paused. 43 Americans went home because she refused to leave them. Silence. Absolute silence. A little boy sitting near the dance floor looked at his mother. "Mom, is she a hero?" His mother couldn't answer. She simply nodded. The general smiled at me again. "Rebecca has spent her entire career making sure other people received the credit. Today, I'm changing that." Without warning, every Marine in attendance stood. Active duty, retired, reserve. One by one, then veterans from other branches stood too. Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, even civilians began rising. Within seconds, every single guest was on their feet. 300 people, standing. For me, the woman who'd been introduced as just a guest? I looked toward my father. His eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, quiet ones, the kind that appear when regret finally catches up. He slowly walked toward me. For the first time in years, he looked small. "Rebecca," his voice cracked. I didn't know." I answered honestly, "You never asked." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. He looked around the ballroom, then back at me. "I'm sorry. I was proud of Emily because she stayed close. I convinced myself you abandoned us." I nodded slowly. "Dad, I left home. I never left my family." He closed his eyes. Those words landed like a punch. Mom stepped beside him. She took my hand. "Honey, every birthday, every Christmas, I kept every postcard you mailed." She started crying. "Your father never let himself read them." Dad whispered, "Because every letter reminded me you chose a life I couldn't understand." I squeezed his shoulder. "You didn't lose a daughter, you just refused to see her." Emily finally approached. Her makeup was streaked with tears. "Becky, I'm sorry. I should have stopped him. When he called you a guest, I froze." I smiled softly. "I know." She hugged me tightly. "Can we fix this?" I looked at her wedding dress, the flowers, the family gathered around. "That's up to all of us." Daniel suddenly laughed. Everyone looked at him. "You know, when I first met Rebecca, I thought she seemed incredibly calm." He grinned. "Now I realize that's because she's spent her life handling situations way worse than awkward family dinners." The room burst into laughter. Even I laughed. For the first time that day, it felt genuine. The general leaned toward me. "One more thing." I raised an eyebrow. "Sir?" He smiled. "Remember that leadership fellowship we discussed, the one advising wounded veterans? It's yours if you still want it." I blinked. "Seriously?" "Already approved. Washington signed it yesterday." He extended an envelope. "Happy retirement, Colonel." Dad stared at the envelope. "You're still serving?" I smiled. "Just differently. Retirement doesn't mean the mission ends." The DJ quietly stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think this reception deserves a different first toast." He handed the microphone to the general. The general raised his glass. "To Emily and Daniel, may your marriage be built on honesty." He looked toward my father. "And may every family remember, never underestimate the quiet person sitting in the back." Glasses lifted across the ballroom. Cheers. Later that evening, as guests were leaving, Dad stopped me outside beneath the string lights. The harbor breeze carried the sound of waves. He reached into his jacket pocket. Inside was my retirement invitation, folded, unopened. He handed it to me. I kept this. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I looked at it for several seconds, then slowly tore it in half. Dad looked horrified. I smiled. "Because I don't need this anymore. Today, you finally showed up." He hugged me, the first real hug we'd shared in nearly 30 years. 6 months later, Dad volunteered every Thursday at the local Veterans Center. Not because anyone asked him to, because he wanted to listen. Really listen. To stories he'd ignored for decades. Emily and Daniel visited often. Mom framed the photograph taken that afternoon. Not the wedding picture, the one showing a 4-star Marine saluting his oldest daughter, while an entire ballroom stood silent in respect. That picture hangs in my living room today, not because it reminds me of military service, but because it reminds me of something far more important. Respect isn't earned by applause, it isn't measured by medals, and it isn't defined by whether your own family recognizes your worth. Sometimes, the people who overlook you the longest are the very ones who eventually witness your greatest moment. And when that day comes, you don't need revenge. You simply need the truth to walk through the front door, just like General Harrison did.